Good afternoon, Congresswoman. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Colin. It's great to be here.
I think back to the 2024 election. Kamala Harris was doing an event in Grand Rapids, right there in your district, and you came in backstage with your boys.
Yep.
And Mark Cuban was going to be opening up for Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff, and your boys had this fantastic opportunity to meet with an incredible entrepreneur, an incredible innovator, and someone who has led in a bipartisan fashion on these issues across AI, crypto, biotech, and a range of issues. And it was fantastic to watch your boys get to meet such a legend.
Yep.
But what was notable at the time as well was Vice President Harris's campaign had recently announced that they were going to protect black men's crypto investments.
Yep.
It wasn't necessarily a message that resonated with the crypto community, and it also didn't seem to activate the right communities within the black community. But what I see now is such a paradigm shift in how Democrats are messaging around crypto, and you and your colleagues are leading on demanding regulatory clarity for everyday investors and actually protecting crypto investors.
Yep.
I want to start off, you sit on the Small Business Committee.
Yeah.
I want to hear, what are you hearing from folks in Grand Rapids and at small businesses around the country about crypto? Is this something you're hearing about?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And, you know, I think today at this policy conference, you know, a lot of people are probably wonking out about, you know, is crypto a security, a commodity? Where should it be regulated? You know, I'm bringing a perspective of a small business owner and people who patronize small businesses, right? And they don't really care how they're regulated. They just want it acceptable, accessible, and reliable. You know, consider this. 77% of small business owners say that they don't have a working knowledge of cryptocurrency. But 84% say that they would use it, allow it in their stores, they'd use it as a form of liquid asset, access to capital, if they knew how to use it, if they understood the framework better. Like, consider that massive gap in knowledge, right? The vast majority don't know anything about it, but they would use it. That's why I'm working with my colleague Brian Jack on the House Small Business Committee to charge the SBA with creating a framework that can help small business owners better understand digital currency.
There's such a fantastic role for crypto to play within small businesses, as I'm sure you're continuing to discover, and it's fantastic to hear that you're leading on legislation. One of the immediate use cases that many of us in this room jumped to whenever we first started learning about this space and seeing where the real world applications for some of these technologies was stablecoins.
Yeah.
We have small businesses paying 2 or 3% on every credit card transaction, is also known as swipe fees,
Yep.
that stablecoins obviate. It's effectively instant and effectively free for small businesses to accept payments. How has the Genius Act reshaped how small businesses are approaching payments? And what are the benefits that they're going to realize in the next decade?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an incredible opportunity and one of the many reasons, you know, why I voted in favor of the Genius Act. You know, I think that we really, you know, we need to see the real impacts of implementation, right? Because you know, we're not realizing that fully yet. But I think this is going to be an incredible opportunity and just create more competition in this space, which can only mean a good thing for small businesses and consumers as well.
To move on to how small businesses raise money, I think we've seen in the past week the SpaceX IPO. IPOs are very much a topic du jour within the media, and we've seen these massive billions and billions and billions of dollar companies IPOing, often to the detriment of retail investors who are being used as exit liquidity for large founders and very, very rich people that got in earlier. One of the things that we're so excited to be building at Solana is tokenized securities, or the ability to issue securities on chain, faster, cheaper, with fewer costly middlemen, which will allow small and mid-sized businesses to IPO in a way that they may not have been in the past.
Yep.
What are you hearing about capital formation and crypto, and how do those things go together in your mind?
I mean, it's exactly what the point that I was making when we started. You know, the small business owner says, I don't care how, just do it. You know, what we are seeing is the number one issue that I hear about from small businesses is the lack of access to capital. You've got a great idea. West Michigan is the home of great companies and innovators, but taking that idea and getting it off the ground, but more importantly, taking your business, to the next level, after those first 5 years is so challenging, and access to capital is the number one barrier. The liquidity provided, by digital currency options does so much to address that need, right? And so we hear our small business owners just clamoring for it. And frankly, I feel like it's almost not enough to talk about the policy ideas that we have, that we've passed in the House, that we've gotten signed into law. They want to see it, get in their hands quicker, faster, and even more reliable. So they're clamoring for it.
So often when we think of small businesses, we think of mom and pop grocery stores, but there are a lot of small businesses right here in this room and within the crypto ecosystem. Maybe two guys with a couple of laptops that are building the next big thing, but right now it's still a small business.
Yep.
Many of those founders and builders constantly live with a fear, especially under some prior administrations and the direction they took, both regulatory and criminal policy, constantly live in fear of being sued by the SEC.
Yep.
Or charged with a crime because they develop non-custodial software and they're charged with a 1960 violation.
Right.
We've seen the Clarity Act include a lot of clarity around what you can do to make sure you're not sued by the SEC or get on the wrong side of the CFTC, but we also have a provision, the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act, which will ensure that publishing code doesn't risk your freedom if you're doing it in a benign and friendly way.
Right.
How do you think legal clarity will help startups spend money on getting more laptops and more headcount as opposed to spending money on lawyers?
So the entire purpose of this legislation that we're working on, with Congressman Jack and his office is to help the SBA deliver the information that is already existing into law, because there is a huge gap in knowledge, right? Everyone in this room who pays attention to this stuff every single day, I guarantee, you all don't even understand the depths of the policy. Consider a small business owner, right, who is his or her own accountant, marketing director, HR specialist, and attorney. They don't have, the time, the bandwidth, the specialized knowledge to fully understand the rules of the road. So we think that it's appropriate, for the SBA to provide some generic, clarity and understanding about what is already existing into law, because the knowledge gap is so huge. It's one thing to pass a law and get it out into the enforcement space. It's another thing for that knowledge to reach the everyday small business owner. And it is you made the point so well that it's not just these mom and pop coffee shops or a little bookstore. They're AI companies, launching down the street. They're defense manufacturers, auto manufacturers in my district that just don't meet that $500 million mark.
I think the question on many people's minds in this room, in Washington, and what we've seen is really a demand throughout the country is how do we get this Clarity Act done? Many see it as a boon for the markets, as a real opportunity to reach that final point of legitimacy. I want to go back to, you talked about getting a bill done. Maybe walk us through what has been, I think, a really fascinating and impressive process for Democrats to come aboard in a bipartisan fashion on a range of pieces of legislation. You're a New Dem. New Dems are really at the tip of the spear on this issue. Maybe you want to talk more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it really is just I think your question gets at the nature of what we do in Congress right now. I know you've been joined by some of my colleagues earlier today and will be later today as well from both sides of the aisle. And I think it's really important that those of us who are committed to doing this work in a thoughtful and serious way are willing to cross the aisle. I'm a member, not only of the New Dems, but the Problem Solvers Caucus, where we talk a lot about these issues. And you have to be able to put your partisan lens aside and just ask the question of how can we get this done for the American people? Because, again, at the end of the day, they don't really care, who is regulating, which portion of it. They want it done, and they want it done right, and it's our job to solve the problem.
When you look at the direction of national polling, it seems that Democrats are leading in the polls right now in terms of control of the House. How do you think, a Hakeem Jeffries speakership and committee control shifting to Democrats will look for this industry that I think has been relearning some of the alliances and allegiances that they might need to keep within a partisan context?
I'm certainly not going to speak for our leadership and the direction they want to go, the committees that they want to go, but I can tell you, among so many of my colleagues, there is an incredible openness and a recognition that this currency is coming, and the American people want individuals who are willing to engage it in a thoughtful and responsible way so that our consumers can be protected, and making sure that some of those great consumer protection issues that we have already codified are carried forward in whatever provision we see next. I think there's just a lot of misinformation out there about various digital currencies. And again, I'll refer back to our bill. So much of it is about education. And I think that's up to each individual member as well to take up the responsibility of talking to their constituents about it, not only explaining their individual vote, but hearing from them about what their concerns are and making sure that we can assuage their fears.
Before I ask the final question, what is the kind of pathway forward for the bill you're working on with Mr. Jack?
We're going to have a hearing in the Small Business Committee in July, so stay tuned for that. If folks are close to Washington, come to the hearing that we're going to have on our Innovation and Entrepreneurship Subcommittee. And then after that, we're going to be rolling it out for introduction. So again, there's a lot of openness to a bill like this. I had a similar success getting a bill around AI usage, bipartisan bill, passed out of committee on a unanimous basis, and we're looking to hopefully get it introduced out of committee and onto the House floor and over to the president's desk before the end of this term.
That's fantastic. And I think the final question I'll ask, and you touched on this by attending committees, but what should everyday innovators be doing to engage with their members of Congress, to be plugged in Washington, and to continue to push forward these types of initiatives?
I think reaching out and asking questions. Our job is to listen to the people and be responsive to their concerns. So reach out, ask for a meeting, make your concerns or your support known so that your representative can be responsive to that in legislating and in voting.
Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Colin.